video, I discuss what you need to know about IELTS speaking. This is part 1 of a 2-part series. Let's begin.
What are the things you need to know about IELTS speaking in order to score high? Well, you need to know the test format. You need to know the differences between parts 1, 2, and 3. You need to understand why timing is important. You need to know how to generate ideas. And you need to know all of this so that you are prepared, you know what to expect, and you set yourself up for a very smooth IELTS speaking exam. Let's talk about the IELTS speaking test format. The test is divided into 3 parts. Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Part 1 lasts 4 to 5 minutes. It consists of 3 topics and you will be asked 12 questions. Part 2 lasts 3 to 4 minutes. This is where you will be given a cue card or a task card. You will be given 1 minute to prepare your answer. You will be given a pen and a piece of paper to take notes during your 1 minute preparation time. You then need to speak for 1 minute to 2 minutes. However, we recommend that you speak for 2 minutes because 1 minute is not enough time to display your vocabulary, fluency, pronunciation, and grammar. So speak for 2 minutes. Once you are done with your 2-minute talk, you may get asked an additional question. Keep your answers short because this is just to round off or finish off your part 2 and then move on to part 3. Now, part 3 lasts 4 to 5 minutes and you are given 1 topic and 4 to 6 questions. So the topic is based on the topic you got in part 2. But what's the difference? Well, the difference is the nature of the question, and that's what we're about to get into now. The differences. What are the differences between parts 1, 2, and 3? Well, besides the different timings that I've just given you, the nature of the questions change according to the different parts of the speaking test. What do I mean by that? Well, let's get into it. Part 1 is like an interview. The questions are about you. For example, you may get asked about your work, your studies, the city that you currently live in, your hometown. These are some part 1 common topics. You may get some other topics like the topic of boats, for example. When was the last time you took a boat? Did you enjoy it? Why? Why not? As you can see, the nature of the question is about you. Part 2 is known as the talk. Why? Because it feels like a little speech because you talk for 2 minutes without interruption. And that's the key phrase, without interruption. It is the longest time that you will speak answering 1 question in the IELTS speaking test. So that's why it's really important to prepare for part 2. So what kind of questions will you get? What will the task cards look like? Well, you will get questions that ask you to describe a place, an experience, a person, an object, an activity, a hobby, something that you like, So it's really important to practice some of these common topics, to look at the different categories of the most common questions. But mainly you're describing something. And so the more you practice, the more topic-based vocabulary you learn, the easier it will become. The thing about part 2 is you want to set yourself up for a good conversation that shows off your English speaking ability, shows off your fluency, pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. So, how do you do that? Well, you look at the topic question, and then you look at the cue card with the bullet points, and you see what could you add and what could you remove. Because there might be bullet points that you really don't know how to answer. It may be a technical question like, describe your favorite exercise and tell me how to do that. Well, what if you don't know the technical terms of that specific exercise and you don't know how to explain how to do that? Well, that may affect your fluency. And we don't want your fluency to be affected negatively. So you can remove that bullet point and add something else. Did you just hear what I said? You can add and you can remove bullet points. Yes, you can. A lot of students think that they have to answer every single bullet point, but that is not the case. The bullet points are there to guide you. The main thing is, are you answering the topic question? Which could be something like, describe your favorite time of the day. That is your topic question, and that's what you need to focus on. Once you've added and removed your bullet points, you then need to look at the topic card again and think, should I add a background story? Do I have enough to say here? Because you would rather be interrupted by the examiner when he says, okay, thank you, than I've run out of things to say, right? So look at the topic question and think to yourself, does this need a bit of a background story? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if the topic question is, describe a photograph you recently took, you may want to add a background story to that photograph that you took. And that might be easy for you because maybe you are on holiday and that's where you took the photo, and you can add a little bit more, like it was my dream holiday, and you can go into detail about that whilst focusing on the topic question. In our course, we go into this in a lot more detail, where we give you strategies on how you can set yourself up for a really good conversation, how you can prepare beforehand, how you can use your 1 minute preparation time, how you can talk about something that you've never experienced before. There are strategies that will help you set yourself up for a really good conversation in part 2. But it's time to move on to part 3. So, part 3. This is known as the discussion. Why? Because it is supposed to represent a discussion between two people. The examiner will ask you follow-up questions. Now, what is that? A follow-up question is a question based on your previous answer. In part 3, the examiner is able and allowed to be more flexible with their script. You see, in part 1, here's a very big difference that I want you to pay attention to. In part 1, the examiner cannot change the script. There is no flexibility regarding time and no flexibility regarding the script. So it's really important to know that, because part 1, you may get interrupted a few times and feel like, wow, this is very structured, but that's why we call it the interview. So back to part 3. Part 3, the examiner has flexibility and it just feels more like a discussion. Now, does that mean you can ask the examiner questions? No. And I understand why you would want to ask that question, because a discussion is between two people, right? But this is still an exam, so you are not able to ask the examiner any questions. You are only able to answer them. So what about the kinds of questions you will be asked in part 3? Well, the topic, as I've mentioned before, is based on the topic that you get in part 2. So then what's the difference? Well, it's again the nature of the question. You will get asked questions about society as a whole. It is more general, and you will discuss abstract ideas. So it's not about you. It's not even about a family member. It's about society as a whole. For example, in part 2, you may get a cue card that says, describe a holiday that you've recently been on. And you describe your holiday. But in part 3, you may get asked a question about holidays in general. So, do you think people take less holidays nowadays compared to the past? And as you can see, that's a general question. It has nothing to do with you. Now, you can add a personal example, but you need to keep it general. There are 7 common question types for part 3. And it's important to know these question types because each question type requires different language and almost a different strategy. So in our course, we actually go into a lot more detail regarding the question types. But I plan on making a video about the different question types so that you can have a general idea of what I'm talking about right now. And just side note, you will not get asked every single question type, and there are more than just the 7, but these are really important to know because they are really common. I hope you enjoyed this video on what you need to know about IELTS speaking, but there is a part 2 coming because, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, you also need to know the timings and why the timings are so important. So I've given you a general idea of the timings, but we go into much more detail in the next video. Also, you need to know how to generate ideas. So that's what we will discuss in the next video. I will see you in the next one. If you like this video, please subscribe, please like, please share, and I'll see you soon.